Hello, and welcome back to class. Today's class, going to talk about mixers and audio consoles. If you can see from our nice diagram here, we are at that second section, the soundboard or the audio console. We had been talking about input devices during the last lecture, and in the next one, we'll be talking about amplifiers and speakers. Now, very important for this one that you go ahead and make sure that after you watch this video, you watch the accompanying video by Rick. Rick will have a video and it'll be up at the same time this video goes up that shows the mixer step by step, piece by piece with the actual mixer. I will be using visuals through PowerPoint and he has a video to accomplish that. It is akin to if we were actually in class, I would go over the lecture and then you guys would have that hands-on time. So it's very important to make sure that you see these back to back because they accompany each other. This lecture is sponsored by Tonal Harmony. Tonal Harmony is a music book that I used in graduate school. So, notation. Um, the standard notation to notate a console to figure out these bass parts is to look at the inputs by the main outputs by the aux outputs. So there is a Midas console that we have in our room, and normally I would point it out, but of course we're not in the room right now. That is a 32 channel console. It has a left, right, center output, and it has 6 auxes. So for this console, we would count it as a 32 by 3 by 6. Now, the console we are using is called the Mackie 14 by 4 by 2. Now, what's very interesting about that is to notate it, it's actually 14 by 3 by 6. Something that is interesting about what they did is that this Allen and Heath console decided in the modeling of its console, it is 14 inputs plus 4 groups by left and right, and it is not counting its mono. This is the model name. This is not the notation for it. So just keep in mind every once in a while you'll find these oddities between what the notation for the console is and what the model number for it is. Now, a console we will use later on in class for our digital console series is the M7CL32. We will be using the 32 version. It comes in 32 and 48 version, but we'll use the 32 version because we have that one in class. It has 32 inputs by 16 outputs. It's very interesting because it's a digital console. It doesn't have a main left and right output. Yamaha decided to call them all omni outs instead of having a main left and right. So it's just a 32 by 16, 32 inputs by 16 outputs. The other thing to notate that I always found very important is we have this nice mixer here. We have all these channels that come in, we have all the channels come out. Something that I find students find confusing is that they assume that that first channel has to go to the first output. This is not the case. The beauty of the mixer is it allows to route any input to go into any output. So if we want that first channel to just come out of the left, we can. If we want it to come out the left and the right, we can. We have those options as to where we want to route it and by how much. I'm going to show you the basic parts and pieces on how to be able to route this. So if we look at our channel strip, and hopefully you guys have printed off that line diagram. If are the printout for this class, it has the channel strip and all the parts and pieces that you can then go and label. If not, I would suggest you pause this video now, take the time to either print that out or at least get it onto an iPad or a surface of which you can sketch on. And I know some computers allow you to sketch either using your mouse or using some touchpad software onto it. But I would really suggest that you get that PDF out at this point. So on the left-hand side, we have the single channel strip, and on the right-hand side, we have the stereo channel strip. We will look at both of those throughout the class, but for the start of this and to show off all the parts and pieces, we'll be looking at that single channel that's on the left. That's because most of the channels on the console is the one on the left, and most of the features are all on this left-hand channel. The stereo channel loses a couple features that allows it to become stereo. So at the very top is the button to select phantom power. We've talked about phantom power. It is 48 volts, hence it has a big plus 48 button on it. Yay, 48 volts. This shouldn't slap you right in the face. By the way, it's called the Vibra Slap, and it slap you in the face. Okay. I told you I had bad jokes. The next button down is the pad or the line level input. Now, a very strange quirk about this console is that to be able to activate those line level inputs, and I'll show you where those are in the console later. But once you plug in a 1/4 inch jack um, into the 1/4 inch jack, you have to hit the pad button to be able to activate the jack. Most consoles do not need this to happen, but on this console, you do have to do it. So once you get into the space, if you ever are able to get into the space and use this console, there might be another class that you have to take it. So if you take AV later on in your college career, make sure you hit that pad button if you ever want to plug into that 1/4 inch jack. Uh, the next unit right below is the gain knob, and this is where we have the variable gain. We'll talk about variable gains when we talk about preamps and amps. But this, in basic form, it allows you to designate how much signal gets into that channel strip. It's not how much volume gets out, it's how much signal gets into the console. Right underneath is the high pass filter. It's part of the equalizers that we are able to do. The high pass filter, I believe, is set at 12K. Right below that is the high frequency, which I know is set at, sorry, the high pass filter is set at 120. Whenever you use this, if you ever have a vocal mic, it's almost always important to hit this button because it cuts out those low ends. You either have it high pass or low cut, same difference, high pass, low cut. Right below that is the high frequency. That is what is at 12K. I apologize, I was reading two screens at the same time. And below that is the high medium equalizer. We'll talk about the equalizers and what they do in a later lecture. Below this is that low medium equalizer, and then we go down to the low frequency equalizer, which, if I remember correctly, is set at I think it was 200 hertz. Now, something very important about this console or any console, if you're trying to use the equalizer, you need to make sure you use the equalizer in. I don't know how many times I've seen somebody fiddle with their equalizer knobs, fiddle, 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 thought they were doing something, and they never actually activated the equalizer. So make sure that if you want to use the equalizer that you do it. On the second note, it becomes a good way that you can do an A/B diagnosis on whether you actually improved the sound or you didn't improve the sound. So turn it on, make some adjustments, turn it off, and see if it sounded better or worse. If it sounds better when you turn it off, then you actually didn't help things. Maybe you should do the opposite thing. So below this on our console is our aux sends. Aux 1 and 2 are preset between pre and post fade. In class, we would only be using aux 3 and 4 because aux 3 and 4 you have to select whether it is pre or post fade. Aux 1, I believe, is set in pre, and aux 2, I believe, is set in post. But I've had to read the manual again to check that. But we normally don't use this one in class. We use aux 3 and 4. So we get the choice between pre and post fade. And of course, I'll tell you what the difference is in just a moment. Now, aux 5 and 6 also have that options. If you notice, aux 3 and 4 are tied between pre and post fade, and aux 5 and 6 are also tied between pre and post fade. So if you need 2 pre and 2 post, then you want to make sure you use 3 and 4 as the pre or the post, and the other two vice versa. Just make sure you have all the options because you won't be able to have 3 as pre and 4 as post. So pre-fade versus post-fade on an aux. And this is the important thing, the big concept for this lecture, and it is something I want to make sure that you guys understand. And it's going to be a little bit more difficult to make sure you guys understand as I don't actually have the visual to see you guys' head churn and the gears trying to work. Hopefully CardDuck will be able to assist in this matter. So the main difference, and something that students keep forgetting to answer fully on the test. So I want to make sure that I say that you need to fully answer this on the test. When you have pre-fade, the channel fader, and we'll look where that channel fader is in a second, has no effect on the aux output. So this is great for band monitors or actor monitors. The key thing is the channel fader has no effect on the aux output. Both of these two subjects has to be in there, the channel fader and the aux output. Um, Without both of them, if you just channel fader has no effect. Well, the channel fader does still have an effect. It just has an effect on the main left and right output. The aux has no output. Well, that's not true. The aux can still have an output depending on how you have the settings. The pre-fade is channel fader has no effect on the aux output. Now, if you write that down, then you'll get the answer correct. That whole little statement. So maybe you should write this down because you get open notes on the test. So post fade, the channel fader has an effect on the aux output. So this is great on conductor monitors because as actors come on off on stage, you want to make sure that that monitor only has the microphone of the person that's on stage, or front fills. Because front fills we want to be able to listen to on the same kind of notation as if we are listening to our main left and right. So Rick has this general rule, and it is a general rule. It works 90 or so odd percent of the time. That if you think about it, that pre-fade is stuff that happens backstage, things we're listening to backstage in set. The band, maybe the backstage monitors, but definitely the band and any of the actor monitors, that stuff on stage. Post fade is stuff that is listening to on stage, the audience hears. So if you think of band on stage is pre-fade and audience as post-fade, and use that as a guide mark, that'll serve you normally about 90% of the time. So to visually see this, say we have our channel fader all the way down. If we bring it up and we're on pre-fade, it will have no effect of whatever the amplitude level is on that speaker. So if we have that speaker up at blaring loud, because it's a monitor for the band and the band always likes to have their monitors blaring loud, then it will still continue to stay blaring loud even if we move that channel fader down. And this is why we like to use pre-fade with monitors, is so that our adjustments on front of house has no effect on what the band is hearing. They need to hear what they need to hear. We need to hear as an audience member what we need to hear, and we don't want what we're adjusting out in the house to affect what they're hearing. Where this comes into the best case is the bass player almost underliningly always likes to turn their amp level to 11, to the point that a lot of times we don't need to put that bass into the house because he already has his amp up so loud that we can hear it clearly in the house. But there might be a couple people on stage that for whatever reason are not getting enough clarity on stage, so we have to turn it up in their monitors, but we are going to have that completely out in the house. Therefore, our adjustment in the house equals 0, but we can still hear it in the monitors. Pre-fade, the band can hear. We don't have to hear any extra bass on it and the front of house level, so the audience isn't smothered in bass. On the other hand, if we switch things out to post-fade, if I have that fader all the way down, it's not going to have any amplitude in it. It's going to be completely quiet. If I bring that fader up, then that speaker is going to have some output. Whatever output we happen to set, it will now have output to that set level. And then again, as we bring that channel fader back down, it will have no volume again. So again, this is great that if we have speakers, so say we have front fills, and front fills are those speakers, if you ever look at the edge of a stage, they're trying to cover those really high price, high dollar seats right at the edge that most of the time don't have a good hearing ability because they're not in the main system. The front fills are to try to cover for that. Or if you're at a place, say like the Dr. Phillips, and you're in the back row and you look up, there's some speakers right under the under balcony called underbalks. We like simple names again. So those speakers are trying to help the people that are underneath that lip from that second level to be able to hear a little bit better. We would want those to be post fade, so as the mixer brings the level up, those come up in ratio to our main left and right. So we want those to be post fade. Hopefully, everybody has understood this. If you don't understand that, if you have any questions for that, please send me a message. I I want to make sure that everybody can understand this because a lot of people in the industry do not understand the difference between pre and post fade, and it's a huge difference between the two, and it makes a huge difference in your workflow and the success of the show. So make sure you understand this concept. It's a big concept for you to know. So going back down on the channel strip, we have our pan knob. So this lets you select if you select that channel to be in the left and right, and you turn the pan all the way to the left, it'll be to the left, and you turn it all the way to the right, it'll be on the right. Um, it also lets you select if you select one of the groups, if you decide to send it to one of the groups, it selects it odd or even. So if you select it to group 1 and 2 and you pan it all the way to the left, it'll be odd. So it'll only come out group number 1. Same token, if you do the opposite and pan it over to the right, it will only come out of group number 2. So it allows you to match those pannings out of the channel into your groups, which will become important if you decide to use groups. Um, right underneath it is the mute switch. Now on this Allen and Heath, it is a mute switch. There are some consoles, particularly Yamaha's, flip it up, and instead of it being a mute switch, it's an on button. So it has thrown many an engineer who has come from one modality and has to jump into another as to which one it is. And I have seen entire shows programmed where they thought that it was a mute switch and it turns out to be a on button. And so everything that was supposed to be off was on and everything that was supposed to be on was off. Made for a very interesting start of a tech. Luckily, I was not the audio engineer for that show. So just keep in mind when you walk up to a console, if you haven't used that console before, it it might be a mute switch in which the red light turns on when that channel is muted, or it may be an on-off button. In that case, if it's an on-off button, the light turns red when that channel is on. Uh, Luckily enough, on every single console I've ever come across, it says right next to that button whether or not it's a mute switch or it's an on or off switch, and it'll say on if it's an on or off switch. Underneath of that is the pre-fade listen button. Um, it is called pre-fade listen because it allows you to listen pre-fade levels onto your headphones. Most consoles will call this the solo button. And when I look at it, I will normally refer to it as the solo button, even though on this console it's the pre-fade listen. This is not the button you want to refer to when I have a question, whether pre-fade or post-fade affects the aux. If you say press the pre-fade listen button, it will not be the answer. It'll be counted wrong. I am talking about that pre and post-fade button. This is the solo button. So right to the side of that is the LED for peak. This will light up bright red. And if I remember correctly, on Rick's demo of the console, he actually turns the game up way too loud just to demonstrate this overload. If you ever have a channel that goes red, turn the gain down. It has gone too hot. Now, that being said, there are some recording methods, there are some mixing methods out there that are very old school that goes into the capacitors and saturating them and to try to just kiss the red a little bit. You guys are not there yet, and this is not the console to be able to do that for. It is not that nice of a console. It doesn't have the right preamps because those preamps are specialty tube amps, and that's why it sounds okay to just kiss that overload. This is not the console for that. Right underneath of that, and it's I believe it's SIG is signal. This is a good light. It turns green whenever you get signal. You want this light to turn green for you. And I already talked to them a little bit, but you have 3 squares underneath that. One has LR, so this is to select where you want that channel to go to the left and right. Underneath that is the 1 and 2. That's to groups 1 and 2. And then underneath that is 3 and 4. That is to route that to group 3 and 4. And last but not least in the channel strip is your channel fader. So these are all the basic parts of the channel strip. The only thing that stereo on this console has that the channel strip doesn't is a selection on where you want the input to, because it has a dual input channel strip on the stereo channels, which is a little strange, but Rick will show you those in detail because it's easier to look at the console and see this than it is for me to try to show this in PowerPoint mode. So other important parts that you might want to use on this console if you ever have to use it. One is the talkback microphone. So it's that XLR jack right there. There is a trim, which is really the gain knob for it. They call it a little bit different because it is actually attenuating the signal instead of amplified in it anyway. Just to the right of that is the headphone jack. Now this is very important because this is where you put your headphones in, and then you would hit that solo button on this console. It's the PFL button, and then you would be able to listen to whatever is happening on that channel. Really, really important to have the headphones working. Make sure your headphones are working. Make sure that headphone jack is working. Make sure you turn that monitor level for the headphone jack up so you can actually hear what is happening. Because especially if you're working a musical, somebody's mic might go out. You hear scratchy, scratchy, scratchy. You might not be sure as to what it is. You can start hitting that solo button on every single channel and eventually be able to figure out who it is if you don't see the red lights kind of blink, blink, blink. They just mentioned the monitor level. And then we also have these LED meters on the right hand side in the middle. Now, what these do is that in normal mode, if there's no channel in PFL mode, they will meter your main left and right. So if you have signal coming through the left and right, those meters will come up, light up. Hopefully you get it right around that -12 mark. That is the ideal mark for this console, is to have your gain set and have sound come out at that -12 level. This is per the manual. Some consoles are different. Some of them like you to set it right at 0, some of them +1, some of them -5. It all depends on the console. This one just happens to be -12, and that's the way this console is set up. If you hit that PFL button, that signal notification for that channel will come up on this left and right meter. So it's really handy, and Rick will show you how to do this when we are setting our gain. We will come up to the mic, we will plug it in as we normally do. We will hit that PFL button, we will start talking into that mic, and we will look for those signals and slowly bring up our gain. Once we get that gain to about the -12 mark, that is when we would stop increasing the gain, unhit the PFL meter, hit our left right select if we want it to go to left and right, slowly bring up the channel fader as we are talking into it, and hopefully that channel should be working out of that speaker if everything else is connected correctly. This is how we meter whether those channels are working or not. Now, if you have an experienced engineer, some experienced engineers can set their gains almost blind because they know that console back and forth and they know that microphone back and forth. Most of the time, you will not be on a console that you've used so much, with a microphone that you've used so much, with an artist that you use so much that you can do that blind. I will set PFLs. Um, Again, most of the time I'm using Yamahas, which means it's a solo button, but I will hit that solo button as we go through every single channel. And it's especially the case because, for instance, drummers, some drummers are very soft, some drummers are very silent, but I want my levels to be about the same no matter who's playing. So I will adjust that gain level so that my levels are equal depending on if I have the jazz drummer who plays really quiet or if I have that rock drummer that you can't turn him down far enough. So even I, as an experienced audio engineer, will use that PFL and solo button to meter all my channels to make sure nothing is overloading, but I'm still getting a really healthy signal. So to the left of the console, we have our aux sends. We have 6 auxes for this console. As I said, aux 1 and 2 are preset. Aux 3 and 4, we get to choose whether it's pre or post fade per channel. And then 5 is 6, we also get to set as groups. Now, on this console, the suggestion that I have with setting the auxes is just like you have to bring up that main fader left and right, you also have to bring up this knob, this potentiometer, to some level to get that output onto the rest of your system. For the purposes of this class and the purpose of what is best to set for this console, we set that knob whenever you're using that aux to the triangle. So, for example, if on one of the exercises I would have asked you to use aux 3, you would then go to aux 3, make sure that this potentiometer is set to that big triangle, and that is considered that unity mark for the auxes. There are other consoles that have different marks, and there might be times in your career that you don't want to send that much signal to X speaker or X output. As for instance, if you are ever working a political event that requires one of those line out boxes, a lot of times you have to attenuate that signal a bit. Otherwise, you will blow out the inputs of every single one of the press people. Now, as much as part of me thinks that's a little bit funny, you want to make sure you back off a little bit. But for the purpose of this class and for this console, we set it to that triangle. So looking a little bit further to the left and the very bottom of the console, this is where we have our main mix happening. So if you look on that left-hand side of this diagram, we have our 4 groups, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now these groups are paired in a way. So 1 and 2 are considered a pair, and 3 and 4 are considered a pair. And when selecting it, you can actually pan each individual group if you want to. You can pan the groups as if they are paired together. It kind of all depends on what you want to do. On the same token, each one of them has a mute button, and all of them have a AFL button. Now, PFL equals pre-fade listen. AFL is after fade listen. So this only listens to what is actually sent to this individual fader as the fader is actually up. To hear anything out, you both have to have something sent to the fader, and that fader has to be up because it is the after fade listen, not the pre-fade listen. And just to the left of that, we have our main left and right mix. It's a good practice for both when we're in class and outside of class that when you are using any console, normally speaking, you would have this left and right at unity, which is that 0 mark. This is not always the case. I have had some systems that were set especially hot that I had to back down off of, and I didn't have time to actually do the proper gain adjustments down the line to turn the amplifiers down. But most of the time, you will have this at unity, which is that 0 mark. And this is also good. So if you ever have an engineer come behind you, you want to set that to this unity mark. Now, something that we wouldn't use for class, but I want you guys to know the concept of, is the matrix. So these are considered a mix of mixes. So these are for special mixes that you might need for very specific sections. And it allows you that extra control that you might need depending on what the mix might be. Now, I use them a lot of times to select because I use my main left and right almost as groups in a way. And then that outputs to my matrices, which controls all the individual speakers that I have in the house. And I do this because a lot of times that the mix I want for the main left and right is one mix of vocals to orchestra. And then I might want my center to be another mix of vocals to orchestra. And then I might want my underbox to be a different mix and my center cluster to be a different mix. And it's all just little adjustments. So I'll have the group of left and right, and here's the orchestra, and here's the vocals. Well, if I'm right at the lip of the stage, maybe I don't need so much vocals because they're right in my face anyway, but the orchestra is way, 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 way back. Or maybe the orchestra doesn't exist at all and we're doing this off of tracks. So I still need some orchestra in those front fills, but maybe because the powerhouse is singing, I do not need to put too much vocals in those front fills. So this allows me to have that adjustment. Again, most people don't use matrices except for like musical purposes or to reroute things very specifically. Sometimes for those press boxes that I talked about earlier, somebody will use a matrix instead of some other option because it makes it very easy to go, oh, you don't need so much music, but you need a little bit more of the vocals. Okay, I can just adjust a little less music, a little more vocals, and that gets sent to the press boxes. So looking at the back of the console, we have a couple ways that we can get our audio information into the back of the console. Now, at the very top is our insert jack. And had we been in class, this would be the jack that people keep on trying to plug in for line input, and I will keep reminding students not to plug in for line input. What the insert jack allows you to do is just kind of as the name says, it allows you to insert an extra signal into the chain so you can get an extra piece of hardware into the chain. So if we had a compressor and we wanted to put that on a very specific channel, we plug in a 1/4-inch TRS jack into the insert, and then we on the other end it has two mono TS jacks. So you plug the mono in to the input, and you plug the other one to the output. What ends up happening is the signal chain then goes from the console, goes out of the console through the insert jack, down through to the compressor, back out of the compressor, and then back into the console. So it allows us to insert that compressor into the signal chain and use it in line with the signal chain. There are many other devices and reasons that we might want to use the insert jack. What we don't want to use that insert jack for is if we ever want to plug our iPod directly into the back of the console and use that for playback. For that, we want to use that line level input. Now, again, key thing with this Allen Heath Mix Wizard, you want to make sure that if you want to use that line level input, that you need to press down that pad button. Otherwise, the line level will not activate and will not work, and you will not get any sound no matter how well you plug it in. Below this is our microphone input, and as it sounds, this is where we will plug in our microphone level signals. So the SM58s that we would normally have for class, this is where we would plug it in. And that last 1/4-inch jack is for our direct out. Now, during class, we would normally use this for recording. What it does is right after gain, it says a signal straight out of the console, balanced, and then you can send that to another device. For class, we would be using the i16 to be able to connect that, and it would allow you to record. So you have a microphone plugged into channel 3, you then plug in a 1/4-inch cable into the direct out of channel 3, and then into the ICE, and it will allow you to record that that microphone. It records that pre-fade, so no matter where you have that fader, it doesn't matter. It will continually record that. Down below in the right-hand corner, something very important that people forget to do often is one, there's a power button. You do have to turn the power of the console on and off. It is an important step, and Rick will talk about the steps in turning the console on and off in real time. I believe it's the next video that will be up on his end. And you also have to plug it into the wall. I don't know how many times that I've come across the system that somebody simply did not plug in the power to the console. Very important for you to do. Something else to note, if you look between the IEC cable and that direct out jack, there's two little diagrams that might be too small on the this video, but if you open up the packet that I sent out for you guys, you can see it clearly. It will tell you what the balance line level settings are. Because if you go to Europe, it used to be different. It is no longer different. Pin 2 is now positive or hot. And the drain wire is always pin 3 now, or pin 1 now. So 2's hot, 3's negative, and pin 1's the drain. And then it also has your insert settings. So it tells you when you have that insert cable, that TRS connector, which one goes out and which one comes back in. So very important when you set it up. CardDuck says so also. So adjusting to the output side of the back of the console, and it does have a little bit of an input side. If you look on the very right of the this diagram, you will see those stereo input channels. Now, what's kind of interesting about this console is it has dual input channels that you can select which fader. So you could theoretically plug in a keyboard into stereo 1, a DJ track into stereo 3, and then also have a CD player into stereo 2 and an iPod into stereo 4, and be able to control all four of those things, but only two of them using the fader of the console. Kind of an interesting concept that's there. So just to the left of that is our main outputs. So if you see the one that says L, that's our main left output. R is our main right output, and mono is our mono output that you can also use for monitors depending on how you have the console set up. Just to the right is our group outputs. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4 group outputs. The 1/4-inch jack there is not an output, it is an insert. They made it so you could insert an extra device, and a lot of people do insert graphic equalizers on their outputs. So this becomes really, really useful in the long run. On the very bottom are our monitor outs, our aux outs, and we have 6 of those. And then on the left-hand side are our matrix outs, and there's also a couple outs that have to do with monitoring and recording, and for the most part, we don't use many of those. So, visually see, here's our top of the console. And again, I want to reiterate, when you plug something in, say you plug it into channel 5, that doesn't mean it has to go to aux 5. It can go to wherever you want it to. It can go to the main left and right. It could go to aux 1. It can go to all 6 auxes, plus main left and right, plus the groups. So it just kind of depends on what you want to do with it. Think of the console as this information super highway. Audio highway? Automation? And that's a work in progress. We'll figure it out later. But it's a way to route that signal from one place to another. It allows you one place to have control on wherever the signal is coming in and all the signals coming out. Here is that central position where everything is continuing. And here's a color shot of that back of the console. Again, the right hand side is all of our inputs. On the left hand side are all of our outputs. Do make sure you plug it in. Now, the last thing that I'm going to make sure that you know how to do is neutralize your console. This is very, very important. This is one of those pet peeves. It's not as big of a deal as it used to be because a lot of people have gone digital, but it used to be a huge deal whether or not somebody neutralized their console. Sometimes meant whether you got asked to do an event again, because that house guy was always annoyed at the newbie who didn't neutralize their console. So what does this mean? After the show run is complete, so if you're doing a bar gig, that would be that night. One concert done, over, you're done with. If we're in a theater gig, that would be when strike happens. I say this because we've had students before who have run the console one night and then decided to neutralize the console every night and try to put the settings back up, even though it was an event that was going to happen over multiple days. You don't neutralize the console until you're done with it and it's about to go into that box truck ready to store for the next gig, or that event is over. Say it's just a bar one off, you're doing the band for one night, they're done, then you would neutralize that console. So, what does that mean? It's resetting the console to the original settings or putting that console back the way that you found it. Now, in some places, that means there might be a couple custom settings that you don't neutralize, and that's up to that place. Most of the places that I've been with an analog console, you're setting it back to factory resets. Now, for that, it means setting all your faders down, your gains all the way down, your aux ends all the way down, any of the buttons that you have on the entire console unselected. Make sure that phantom power is off for every single channel. Big critical, just in case somebody accidentally puts a ribbon on one of the channels when they're using it the next time. You want to set all equalizers and pan knobs to 12 o'clock. Now, yes, this is a little bit different than you would. Most people think, oh, I'm going to turn all the pan pot knobs all the way down. On pan knobs, turning it all the way to the left means that it's pan to the left. We want that to be at 12 o'clock, which is our center. Same with equalizers, their neutral position is at 12 o'clock because with equalizer, you can either amplify or attenuate. And this is going to look strange because I'm doing it my direction and not your direction. But in either case, You want to make sure that it's at 12 o'clock and at that neutral position. The other thing that you want to do, and I know a lot of engineers don't always do this, is make sure that your channels are either muted, or if it's one of those consoles that have an on off button, make sure you check to make sure all those channels are off. Now, as I said, not as big of a deal with digital consoles because you can factory reset them. A lot of times, guys are coming in with their own show file. I will always come in with my fresh show file because I don't trust what anybody else has done before me. And it just solves so many problems when I just come in with a fresh show file. But it's still important, especially your first couple times that you come in with it. So, anyway, have a good day and make sure you watch that video that Rick will be posting in within the next day or so.